she is gone. The candles are still burning. The wine is still poured. 2 glasses, full, untouched, sitting on a silver tray that someone arranged with care and some hope. White roses lean in a crystal vase on the mantelpiece, and the coverlet has been turned down with a precision that speaks of a housekeeper who believed this night would matter. The fire has burned low. A single pearl earring sits on the dressing table where she left it in her haste. He is standing in the doorway. Edmund Ashford, 7th Duke of Ashford, a man who has not been surprised by anything in 15 years, is standing in the doorway of his own wedding chamber with both hands loose at his sides, looking at the proof of his wife's absence. He crosses to the window and looks out into the east garden, where the paths run dark between stone borders and the grass is pale with dew. She is down there. He does not know this yet. Eleanor Voss, the Duchess of Ashford as of 18 hours ago, is sitting on a stone bench in her wedding dress, slippers soaking through from the grass, perfectly still, both hands in her lap, back straight. She is thinking, with the clear and careful mind that is her most singular quality, about a letter she found on a writing desk that was not hers to read. She is deciding what to do. She is not crying. She is not afraid. She has just made the most dangerous decision of her life, and on this bench, in this damp garden, she is at peace with it. He is still at the window, realizing, the recognition arriving slowly, the way cold water rises in a flooding room, that he is not simply surprised she has gone. He is afraid, not of scandal or legal inconvenience. He is afraid because he is conscious of something he has not permitted himself since the afternoon in the solicitor's office, when a woman in a 4-year-old dress sat with her back to the wall and assessed the room the way he would have. He had hoped she would be there when he opened the door. She's not. This is where our story is. The burning candles, the poured wine, the man at the window, and the woman on the bench making herself ready for what comes next. Before I take you back to where this began, if you have found your way to Whispered Thrones for the first time, welcome. We tell stories here about women who find themselves in impossible positions and choose, quietly and with great dignity, to become something those positions were never designed to produce. If that sounds like your kind of story, stay, subscribe. There are more where this came from. Now let me take you back, not to a wedding and not to a letter, but to a woman at a kitchen table in a house that was no longer hers, deciding what she was willing to survive. The house had belonged to her father. The Reverend Edmund Voss of Harwick had lived in it for 31 years, brought his wife home to it, raised his daughter in it, and died in it on a Tuesday in August, with Eleanor's hand in his and a page of Montaigne open on the nightstand. He had trusted his grandfather's arrangement, the arrangement of a man who assumed there would always be a male Voss to stand between his granddaughter and the world. There was not. The How Auspers Mr. Barnaby Holt of Dorchester, a distant cousin who had met Eleanor twice and remembered her, if at all, as a quiet child who read too much. He wrote a letter of condolence, and then a second letter explaining the reversion. He intended to sell. He was giving her 30 days. Eleanor Margaret Voss was 26, with no title, no fortune, no useful connections, £10 in a savings account, and a position at a Bath school that would not pay her for 6 months and might not pay her at all. She had accepted it and told herself it was a kind of rescue. Each morning she sat at the kitchen table in the early grey light and read 1 page aloud from whatever book she had open. She had started when her father's hearing failed, reading so he could follow the shape of a sentence without straining. She had not stopped after he died. She told herself it was practice for Bath. The whole truth was that when she stopped reading aloud, the house became the kind of quiet with no address in it. The quiet that suggested the world had gone on and would not notice when she followed. She was not a woman who pitied herself. She was clear-eyed about her situation. She knew what she was. A woman of negligible position and genuine intelligence in a world with no natural place for that combination. She had watched the silence settle over other women like her, the gradual fading, the way clever women in reduced circumstances became furniture, present, functional, invisible. She was afraid of that silence more than poverty, more than anything, except the specific fear that her father's death had been the last time she was truly known. She was not a woman given to self-deception, which meant she allowed herself to see clearly what the bath position actually was. Not a beginning, but a holding action, a way of existing at the edge of visibility until something better presented itself, or until the years ran out. She told herself the clarity was strength, not despair. She told herself she had chosen this. She told herself it every morning, one page aloud, until the words of whoever she was reading had settled the room back into something livable. She wrote back to Barnaby Holt and said she would attend whatever meeting he had arranged, because she had nothing to lose that she had not already decided to relinquish. The man who had set that meeting in motion was, at that same moment, sitting in a solicitor's office on a grey London Tuesday, being told about Frederick Kane. His name was Edmund Charles Ashford, 7th Duke, 34 years old, and in some essential sense he had been 34 since he was 19, when his brother James died of fever, and left him a dukedom and no idea who he was outside James's shadow. He had spent 15 years becoming not a person but a position. 3 estates, a London house, parliamentary influence through proxy relationships with sitting MPs, a reputation for precision and reliability that had been built by never, not once, allowing himself the luxury of public hesitation. His elder brother had been the warm one. James walked into rooms and made them brighter simply by virtue of being pleased to be there. Edmund had watched this quality in his brother the way you watch a talent you do not possess, with admiration and a specific private grief that had no name for it. When James died, Edmund stepped into the dukedom, not as himself, but as the only available Ashford. And he had been performing the role with such thoroughness ever since, that the performance and the man had become difficult to distinguish. He was efficient, he was exact, he was, in the most fundamental sense, lonely in a way he could not have named, and would not have permitted himself to name even if he could. Kane was a distant cousin, the kind that only matters in law. His solicitors had found a flaw in the 5th Duke's will. If it held, and Edmund died without a documented heir, the title transferred to Kane. His solicitor laid this out with papers and waited. Edmund looked at them. He said, "Find me a woman of clean name, no entanglements and no expectations. Someone who needs something I can provide. I want the matter settled before the month is out." He said it the way a general says, "Move the artillery here." A problem had presented itself. He had identified the solution. He had, by the time the solicitor finished writing, already moved on. This was his flaw. Not coldness, because at his core he was not a cold man. His flaw was the belief that if he kept moving, the thing underneath would not catch up. James had been the warm one. Edmund had learned to be useful instead. When James died, useful was all he had left. He did not know what he was like when he stopped. He would learn. The solicitor's office in Holborn smelled of coal smoke and old paper, and was too warm for the season. Eleanor arrived on time and chose the chair farthest from all 3 men, present, back to the wall, sightline on the door. A small action she was barely conscious of making, but the man at the window had turned by then, and he was watching her with an expression she could not immediately place. Not dismissive, not predatory. He was looking at the way she had read the room, as though she had just done something he recognized. She looked back at him and noticed what she always noticed first, not faces but orientation. Both other men in the room had adjusted, minutely toward him, the way weather vanes adjust toward wind. He had not asked for this. It was simply the consequence of what he was. She noticed it, before she noticed anything else about him, including that he was looking at her in a way that cost her something she had not expected to spend. She had prepared for condescension. She had a whole internal apparatus for it: patience, a measured quality to her responses, the capacity to answer questions without answering the contempt underneath them. Condescension she could manage. What she had not prepared for was the quality of his attention, which was not dismissive and was not warm, but was simply, precisely present. Arden explained the arrangement. A marriage, legal and legitimate, in exchange for full financial security, allowance, permanent Derbyshire residence, the end of the 30-day clock, the end of Bath. When he finished, Edmund Ashford addressed her directly. "Not through the solicitor," he said. "Before you answer, I want you to ask whatever you need to ask. I have no interest in a woman who agrees to something she doesn't understand." The room went quiet. Eleanor said, carefully managing what had just happened in her chest. "May I ask 3 questions?" He answered all 3 without softening. She thanked him and said she needed 1 hour. In the corridor she stood with her back against the wall and her hands flat on the plaster and breathed. Not from fear, because she had just been spoken to as a person capable of understanding her own situation, and the experience was disorienting enough that she needed a moment before she could think clearly again. She had been many things to many people over the course of the last 8 months. A problem, a liability, a distant relation, a candidate. She had not, in all that time, been addressed as someone whose understanding of her own circumstances was of any particular consequence. 7 minutes. Then she went back and said yes. The marriage was performed 6 days later in a Mayfair church with only solicitors and a housekeeper as witnesses. 23 minutes. Eleanor wore the 4-year-old dress. No flowers. Ashford Park announced itself through the carriage window over 5 full minutes of approach. The drive lined with beeches not yet fully in leaf, the house assembling itself incrementally from the distance, stone by stone, until the whole argument of it was visible. Eleanor looked at it without speaking and thought, "This is the shape of the rest of my life, and I have agreed to it, and I am going to be very deliberate about what I make of it." She had made harder agreements with less choice. She intended to hold herself to the same standard here, Mrs. Poole met them at the door and showed Eleanor to her chambers, rooms of a size and quiet elegance she would need several days to stop being startled by. Edmund spoke to the estate manager, wrote to Arden, and for 3 days spoke to everyone in the house except Eleanor. She had not expected warmth. What she had expected, she realized on the 3rd evening, sitting at the far end of the long dining table in a silence broken only by the soft movement of the serving staff, was something like acknowledgement. Some small, occasional recognition that she existed in the same room as him. It did not come. She filed it away. She kept herself busy. She explored the house. On the 4th day, passing the back staircase, she caught one sentence from 2 housemaids. "They say Miss Drummond took one look at what was actually required of her and left for her aunt's in Scotland." Eleanor kept walking. She did not stop until she reached her chambers, where she sat in the chair nearest the window with both hands in her lap and was very still for a long time. She had not been chosen. She had been the alternative, the woman who could not afford to say no, selected precisely for her lack of options. The mutual necessity she had told herself the story was had never been the whole story. She had given the arrangement a dignity it had not possessed. She sat with this until it settled. Then she made a deliberate choice, not to set it aside but to let it matter, to feel the specific shape of it. She had been a last resort. She was allowed to know that and not perform otherwise. The knowing did not destroy the arrangement, but it told her something true about where she was. And Eleanor had learned early that the only thing more dangerous than the truth was deciding not to look at it. "Now, before I take you further," I want to pause a moment. You have been watching this woman navigate an impossible room since she walked into it. Every choice clear-eyed, considered, quietly courageous, and still the county watches her for errors. Still the man who owes her honesty will not meet her eyes at dinner. The worst is not yet behind her. Ask yourself what you would do with a pride like hers in a house like that. Keep your answer, because she is about to be tested. 3 weeks after their arrival at the Matlock County Assembly, Lady Constance Hargrove found Eleanor within 10 minutes and spent a quarter-hour performing a social welcome that was, in practice, a surgical examination. At the end, she took Eleanor's hand and said, with the room listening, "What a very unusual choice you are, my dear." Eleanor held her gaze for one quiet moment. Then she said, "I rather thought so too." 3 surprised laughs, Lady Hargrove's first genuine flicker of respect. Eleanor publicly marked as anomalous. Not a schemer, not a charity case, but something the county had no ready language for, and understanding that they would now watch her for every error she had not yet made. 1 week later, Barnaby Holt arrived uninvited. He had heard about the entail challenge and calculated that if Kane won, the Duchess would have no income and no legal standing. He came, he said, to protect her. If she supported his claim to a small Harwick cottage her father had set aside for her personally, he would ensure she had somewhere to go. He framed it as consideration. Between every line it was a threat. Eleanor gave him tea, agreed to nothing, sent him away. Then she sat a long time in her chair and decided, for reasons she would later recognize as her first serious error, not to tell Edmund. She was not the kind of woman who ran to her husband with her difficulties. This was true, and also wrong. It was the first choice she made that placed her pride above the genuine texture of their arrangement, and pride in her position was a luxury she could not always afford. 2 days later, Miss Sophia Kane paid a social call. Frederick Kane's younger sister, visiting a friend in the district. The conversation was pleasant in the manner of someone who knows precisely what they are doing and chooses to do it with a light hand. Near the close, Sophia mentioned she had been at a London dinner 2 months before, at which Edmund was present, and that he had spoken of a practical solution he was pursuing. She did not elaborate. Before the meeting in Holborn, before Eleanor had any knowledge of any of this, Edmund had been discussing it. In rooms she was never in, at tables she was never seated at. She had been evaluated and selected as a footnote in someone else's dinner conversation. When Edmund returned that evening, Eleanor told him. He listened carefully. He said, "She should not have called. I'll write to her brother." He moved on. He did not ask how she was. Eleanor watched him go and understood, with the undeceived clarity that was her particular quality, that in his natural way of operating, she would never be a person first and a solution second. She was incorporated, managed, and she would remain also unless something changed. She stopped waiting for him to surprise her, and in stopping, in that specific release, she became the most alive person in his household, because she stopped performing patience and started simply being herself, and herself was considerably more interesting than what she had been performing. Consider what you know about him now. The man who told her he had no interest in a woman who did not understand her situation, and then spent 6 weeks not asking whether she was all right. Something is coming. Stay with me, because this next part is what the story is actually about. It was Mrs. Poole who changed things, but it was Eleanor who found the library first, 3 days before Mrs. Poole's visit, wandering the east wing on a grey afternoon with no particular destination. Eleanor had pushed open a door and found a room that felt different from every other room in the house. It was small by Ashford Park's standards. The chairs were faded and comfortable. The books were numerous and real. Not the leather-bound, decorative kind arranged by colour in the formal rooms, but actual, red, annotated things, the spines softened from handling. Somebody had loved this room. She had stood in the doorway for a long moment before stepping aside, and she had spent the next 2 hours there with the feeling of someone who has found something they did not know they were looking for. She had not asked whose room it was. She was not yet ready to know then Mrs. Poole came to her sitting room on a Tuesday evening with a question about the household linen. Eleanor answered it. Mrs. Poole did not leave. She stood near the door with her hands folded and the expression of a woman who has been carrying something for some time and has finally decided to set it down. She said very quietly, "Your Grace, I wonder if you know that the Duke has spoken of you." In the days before the wedding, Edmund had returned to Ashford Park alone. A single night, for reasons Mrs. Poole had never understood. Before he left the next morning, he came to the kitchen and asked her to prepare the small library on the east wing. Not the formal library, the small one where his brother James had read, shut since James's death 11 years before. He had it aired, dust covers removed, lamps checked, books uncovered, he told Mrs. Poole. "The woman I am bringing here reads. She should have somewhere that is hers." He returned to London the next morning and never mentioned it again. He had not told Eleanor the room existed, Mrs. Poole said. "I thought you ought to know," and left as quietly as she had come. Eleanor sat with both hands in her lap and looked at the wall. She felt something she recognized immediately, with the honest clarity that was also her quality, as the very thing she had been most determined to prevent. She felt seen, not managed, not incorporated. Seen, specifically, in the quiet way of a man who noticed she read and came home and made a room for it before he had any reason to think it would matter. She held the library against everything else, the letter on the desk, the dinner in London, 6 weeks of silence at his table, the way he moved to the next problem while she was still inside the last one. All of this was true. The library was also true. Both things occupied the same space, and she was going to have to decide what to do with that. She let the library in, alongside everything else. Not instead of it, but alongside. She understood, in letting it in, that the structure she had built to protect herself was no longer intact, and that the most honest thing she could do was not rebuild it, but to decide what she actually wanted. She wanted to be a person in this house, not love. She would not demand what she was not owed. She wanted to exist here as Eleanor Margaret Voss, who read aloud every morning and asked 3 questions in a solicitor's office and sat on a stone bench in wet slippers at peace with the most dangerous decision of her life. She had not, until this moment, believed she had the right to ask for that. The right came from the library. She found Edmund 3 days later in the East Wing Library itself. Late afternoon, the light going gold and sideways through tall windows, illuminating the dust and the old book spines, and the comfortable disorder of a woman who had been reading since 2 o'clock. On the floor, back against the bookcase, books open around her. She was still in the last of the light when she heard him in the doorway. She did not look up immediately. His stillness had a different quality than usual, not managed, not performed. The stillness of a man who has found something unexpected and is deciding what to do. She looked up. He was standing with both hands loose at his sides, the same posture as the empty wedding chamber. "A different weight," she said. "You had this opened for me." "It was not a question," he said. "Poole told you," she said. "Yes." He crossed the room and sat in the chair near the window, not at the periphery, not maintaining the practiced distance of every previous interaction. He sat down. He waited. Eleanor set the book down. She said, "I want you to understand something." She was not crying. Perfectly still. Her voice had the quality she used when what she was saying was the most important thing she had said in a long time. Quiet and exact, with nothing decorative in it anywhere. She said, "I know what I am in this arrangement. I knew it before I found the letter in your study. and I knew it again when your cousin's sister sat in my parlour and described you discussing me at a dinner I was never invited to. I know what the entail is. I know what Cain wants. I know what I provide you with by existing as his wife." She paused. He did not move. She said, "I am not telling you this because I am angry. I am telling you because I think you are a man who believes that if he does not speak a thing, it does not exist. And I need you to know that I see it, all of it, the letter, this library, the way you answered my questions in that solicitor's office, and then spent 6 weeks not speaking to me at dinner. I see it, and I am asking you, not for love, not for warmth, not for things you may not be capable of. I am asking you, as the person who has agreed to exist in your legal structure and in your East Wing library, to let me be a person in this house. That is all I am asking." The room was very quiet. He looked at her for a long time, the man who was never seen to hesitate, who had spent 15 years moving from problem to solution without stopping. He looked at her hands in her lap and the books around her on the floor, and the quality of her stillness, which was not his kind of stillness. Not managed, not performed, genuinely at rest in herself. He said, "I don't know how to do that." It was the most honest thing he had said to anyone in 15 years. She heard it. She heard what it cost, the admission that there is something he cannot manage, something he has been moving away from for so long that stopping feels like the beginning of a fall he cannot recover from. She said, "You don't have to know how, you only have to be willing to try." He nodded, small, real, the first entirely real thing that had passed between them since Holborn. Neither of them spoke for a while after that. The light moved, the dust mote settled. He got up and went to the fireplace in the East Wing library that had not been lit in 11 years, and he lit it himself. He did not call for anyone. He found the tinder and stayed crouched there until it caught, and then he sat back down, and they were both quiet in the room together, and the fire was burning. Edmund rode to Matlock 2 days later and met with Frederick Cain directly, not through solicitors, but as one man to another in the private room of an inn. He told Cain that the challenge could proceed if Cain wished, that Edmund was no longer arranging his life around it. Cain had expected a negotiation. He received instead a laying down of the game that dismantled the game entirely. He delayed his filing. The legal threat would work through the courts in its own time and fail. But its power over Edmund was gone. That was the more important thing. What Eleanor noticed in the days that followed was smaller and more true. He came to dinner and spoke to her, not about the estate. He asked what she was reading. She told him. He disagreed with her interpretation. She told him he was wrong. He considered it, genuinely, openly, in front of someone else, without the performance of certainty. He said, "You may be right." Poole, passing the dining room door, closed it with the quiet satisfaction of a woman who has been waiting a month and is very pleased to have lived to see it. Holt sent a letter to Edmund raising the Harwick cottage, couched in the language of consideration and reeking of the opposite. Edmund read it in his study, walked to Eleanor's sitting room, and handed it to her without explanation. He said, "This is yours. Tell me what you want to do, and I will arrange it." The cottage had been her father's specific bequest. Holt had no claim. Edmund's solicitor confirmed it and wrote to Holt formally, and Holt, a man of small malice and medium nerve, retreated and did not appear again. Eleanor had the deed placed in her writing box. She looked at it sometimes the way a person looks at a door they know they can open. Not because she intended to leave, because knowing she had somewhere to go, something that was hers by right and not by arrangement, changed the nature of staying. She had not been given security. She had been helped to see the security she already possessed. By autumn she was in fact, and not only on paper, the Duchess of Ashford. Lady Hargrove at the autumn assembly introduced her to a newcomer not as Edmund's unusual choice, but simply as the Duchess, the smallest recognition imaginable. Eleanor had never felt more known. Kane's challenge eventually came before a court and failed. Edmund received the news on a Tuesday and told Eleanor at dinner. She asked, "How do you feel?" He thought about it. The genuine, unhurried consideration of someone who has learnt the question deserves a real answer. He said, tired, but differently than before. She said she was glad. He believed her. This story was never really about a marriage. It was about what happens when a woman who has been trained to disappear decides, very quietly, to remain. Eleanor Voss did not walk into that solicitor's office looking for love. She walked in looking for survival. What she found was something harder to name, a place in the world that was genuinely hers. Not given, not performed, not managed, but built. Sentence by careful sentence, in a room that someone lit a fire in and did not explain. I think that is why you stayed. Not for the Duke, though he became worthy of staying for, but because you recognize something in a woman who takes the worst option available to her and decides it will not be the last word. If you found something here worth keeping, subscribe to Whispered Thrones. There is a new story waiting, and it starts as all the best ones do, with a woman in an impossible room who has just decided to speak. And if you do not subscribe, well, you know where the East Wing Library is. Do not be a stranger. The candles are still burning. But now there is someone in the room.